Well, good evening or good morning or good afternoon, whatever time of the day it is that you are joining us. This is the Tulsa World Scene podcast. I'm here with the lovely and talented Jimmie Tramel, our lovelier and talented colleague Grace Wood is on vacation this week. And so that kind of gave us the idea that being as she is of tender years compared to the two of us, that we might talk about stuff that old guys know and won't make her feel embarrassed for when we talk about them. For example, I believe this year is the 60th anniversary of Johnny Carson taking over as host of The Tonight Show, which he posted he held until, is it 98 into the 90s, I think.
It was definitely in the 90s. Was it? Did he call it? It may have been 92. Like it could have been an even 30 years that he was at the helm.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that sounds about right. But it was in that area, and so that was for those of you who know it only from its current incarnation. It's kind of hard to believe how big an impact that show had on entertainment for so many years. The number of stand-up comedians, for one thing, who got their start on the Tonight Show, pretty much name anybody who was successful. And getting the number one thing was getting on Carson. But you really knew you made an impression and your career was going to go because they were always the last guest on the show. And if Carson invited the person over and to sit down and chat for a minute, that was like, you have arrived like you would never have imagined.
Yeah, that was like getting a star on your report card from the teacher if he invited you over to sit next to him. And you're right. If you were a stand-up comedian and you were on that show, you could just bank it by the next day your bookings were going to be off the charts because you all of a sudden were famous. It was must-see TV as far as late night goes. And then, everybody who was anybody was on the show, and Johnny Carson had a very conversational style with those guests.
And he was very good about he always did his monologues, and they were to come out, and they were always topical, but they kind of sound odd. They were topical, but they were never political. You never knew how Johnny Carson voted from the comedy that he did. It was it kind of also harkened back to vaudeville in a way. They would do the skits like the tea time movie, where he would have these usually with the Carol Wayne as his scantily clad assistant, and there would be these lists of rhyming actors, always ending with something silly like and Beauregard the Wonder Dog or something. I remember those very well. Art Fern and Tea Time Movie Hour. So.
You didn't know how he voted. You did know he did not like divorce attorneys. You didn't know that from his monologues. I happened to catch on a rerun. MeTV shows it's Antenna TV shows classic reruns of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and I happened to watch the one where Gary Shandling was a guest, and he was peppering Carson with questions that he would use later to be on the Larry Sanders Show. He was talking about this new show he was doing, and he was asking Carson all these very specific questions that you knew that he used in forming that Larry Sanders character. It was really interesting to go back and watch.
I happened to, when I was on holiday recently, going through the channels in the in a TV on TV in another town, and I came across a rerun and just caught the last half of it, but it was Jonathan Winters
Hmm.
just coming out and basically improving and cracking everybody up. Um, I always liked when he showed up because you never knew what he was going to do, and you can find you can find scenes of the Tonight Show all over YouTube and the like of people like there's one of Robin Williams and Jonathan Winters trying to crack each other up and
Hmm.
just all kinds of stuff. It was also fascinating in it was one of the last shows where a big band was featured. And there's a Tulsa connection
Okay.
because I don't it was right around the time that in the early days, the band director for the Tonight Show was Skitch Henderson, who for 3 years in the early 70s was the music director of the old Tulsa Philharmonic.
Hmm.
And then Doc Severinsen took over and was the band leader for years and years. And I think this year he finally decided to stop performing. He's in his 90s, you know, and I got the chance to talk with him and meet with him when he'd come to play with the orchestra, and he was a fascinating chap, that was for sure. He'd always demand that he be allowed into the hotel kitchen to cook his own food because he said, I like Italian food and nobody makes it the way I like it, so I have to do it myself. So always fascinating. But that's not the only thing having an anniversary this year that old people will remember. What's another one?
I thought you were doing Karnak for a minute. I thought you were doing the Carson thing. I have to guess.
I don't have the envelope to hold up. Yeah.
Well, you want to go 40 with a sitcom, or you want to go 50 with a certain after-school program? Which one?
Let's go in order of age, and this is one that you probably know a little bit more about than I do.
This hits a sweet spot with a lot of people, but the ABC after-school special turns 50 this month, and it was one of those life lesson shows where you're going to learn something, and they tackled some serious issues, but mainly they were a launching pad for many young actors who, before they were stars. I talked to someone recently who met Rob Lowe when he was in Tulsa for the filming of The Outsiders. And at that point in time, Rob Lowe had done, guess what? An after-school special, but he wasn't famous yet. So it was after The Outsiders that Rob Lowe, blew up. But it's just, you could probably just go on and on and on with the young actors who got a job on after-school special. Heather Langenkamp was in one back in the day from Tulsa. Val Kilmer, just the list is on forever with ABC after-school specials. And if you were to put me on the spot and say, gee, can you name a specific one? I really can't, because they all kind of run together. I didn't watch them regularly, but I watched them occasionally. But it's just kind of a nostalgic milestone for people who grew up. They lasted a lot longer than I thought, too. They lasted for, more than a decade.
Okay. I'm trying to think if I ever watched one in my when I was a tender and callow fellow, as the song goes.
They were after school, so you probably had some counter programming, like, do I want to watch Gilligan or cartoons or something serious?
And after after a long hard slog through the fifth grade, you want some escape. You don't want to have to deal with issues that will help you grow as an individual. You just want to see what they're making out of coconuts on Gilligan's Island this particular year. But although it wasn't part of this, but there was a movie, I believe it was made right around 1970, that I remember seeing on our Magnavox console TV with the slightly round screen. It was called JT, and it was about a young boy in Harlem, uh, single, son of a single mother. She, works most of the day, and he's left on his own,
Mhm.
uh, getting into bad, things that he shouldn't get into. And then in an abandoned house, he finds a cat and starts taking care of the cat, charging, tuna fish to his mother's account at the corner store, that kind of thing. Um, and it ended up being an incredibly sad thing. But it's stuck in my head. I can still see scenes from it. And I don't know why I watched it, because like I said, it was like on a Saturday afternoon. But it was such a moving and real film. Flash forward some 40 years later, Lily Tomlin is coming to town to do a one-woman show. And I got the chance to talk with her. She was a delight and a whole lot of fun. And she made an offhand comment about something that her partner, Jane Wagner, who wrote almost all of her material, had done. And I go, that sounds like something I remember. And I start describing the plot of this movie. And Lily Tomlin says, oh my goodness, hold on. And I hear her put her hand over the phone, and she called out, I heard her, Jane, I'm talking to a guy who remembers JT. And she asked me for my mailing address. And a week later, a paperback copy of the original novel that Jane Wagner wrote that was adapted showed up in my mailbox. So that was an after school special, that was as close to an after school special as I could come. It had nothing to do with it, but it was I think it's a lovely story.
Well, let's shift into a place where everybody knows your name.
Okay. Cheers. And also, that's the name of the TV show, I can imagine.
Turns 40 this month.
40 years.
If not this month, then around this time. I forget if it's September or October. But anyhow, it's 40. And, obviously, I assume it did make Rolling Stone recently ranked the top 100 TV series of all time. Bill Hader's show on HBO, Barry, made it, which was awesome. But, Cheers had to be on there because it's just one of the greatest sitcoms of all time.
And it was one of those ones that I was just reading something about it recently where it nobody thought it was going to go anywhere, and it was tanking in the ratings. And then they shifted it to part of Thursday night, and it just took off. And I remember that everybody thought that when the actress that played Diane,
Shelley
Long, thank you, decided to leave to become a movie star, and we know how that worked out for her. That the show was going to lose, it was just starting to take off, and the lead goes away. It's never going to be as good. And it got better with Kirstie Alley filling that role, but and then the creation of Frasier Crane, which goes on to become another one of the best sitcoms ever made. So it was. Do you have was it one that you watched? Do you have a favorite episode?
Absolutely watched it. I mean, I enjoyed when on Channel 8 they would do the reruns late night after the news with Cheers, Night Court back to back. I think but anyhow, certainly I watched all of them, and trying to think if there was a favorite. I always loved the one where they got into the rivalry with the bar down the street. I forget the name of the bar, but they would try to prank each other, and the pranks kept escalating so big, and Cheers would eventually, 'end up getting the worst of the deal. But I love those for sure.
I remember the final line of dialogue in the final episode, and that's about it.
Mm.
Which is, sorry, we're closed.
Yeah.
Somebody trying to get in. Well, another one that's having 50 years is MASH.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It just turned 50.
It debuted in 1972. And yeah, that's one I know I have seen every one of in the same situation as you were when we were in college. They always followed the 10 o'clock news, and everybody would, gather in around the dorm TV and watch that week's episode or that day's episode. And I can't begin to talk about the number of favorite episodes I have.
Sure.
But,
And that show was the epitome of next man up too, because every time someone left, they bring in somebody else, whether it's, Colonel Potter or BJ, and it just keeps humming right along. It was pretty amazing.
I remember reading somewhere that when they shot the pilot, the network executives were appalled and wanted them to take out all the blood in the operating room sequences. They didn't want it to be, well, this is a comedy, is it? You got people dying in here. This is a comedy. But so it was the epitome of the, I guess you could say it was the first dramedy. The term they tried to coin a while back when it was comedy or half-hour shows that didn't quite fit into the laugh track.
The scene where Radar has to announce that Henry has passed away. I mean, that was pretty touching. I mean, he did a great job in that scene.
Supposedly, only about 3 people in that scene knew what he was going to say. And apparently, Gary Berghoff, who played Radar, was not given his speech until right before they rolled the cameras.
Wow.
And so the shock that you see on most of the faces of the people was real. They were not expecting that to happen. And speaking of Tulsa connections, Mary Kay Place wrote several of the episodes and also appeared in some, including one where she becomes sort of the love interest of Radar O'Reilly. But she also wrote one of the best episodes, I believe it's called The Nurses, where it follows the nurses and their antagonistic relationship with Lieutenant Margaret Houlihan, played by Loretta Swit, and her final confrontation with them over the way that they treat her. Is one of her best moments in the whole series. It also is one of the best, if not the best. So
I'm ashamed of myself, but I think there was an actress from Quapaw as well who was on the series, and the name is escaping me. So Judy Farrell.
Yeah,
there you go.
Was married to Mike Farrell.
There you go. Yeah, there's another Oklahoma connection.
And there if memory serves me right, there was one episode where Colonel Potter's horse becomes ill, and they call BJ Honeycutt's father-in-law in Quapaw, Oklahoma.
There you go. Yeah.
To figure out what they need to do to get the horse back on its feet again. So yeah, it's and speaking of another Tulsa connection, one of Patrick Swayze's first roles was in MASH, where he plays a soldier who discovers he has leukemia. And that's also an episode where the priest, Father Mulcahy, is wanting to impress a cardinal that's visiting. And the way those two storylines come together is one of my favorite moments in the whole series. So
We could do pop culture anniversaries forever, but do we have anything we want to hit on and tell people that will actually be in the Tulsa World Online and Tulsa World this week?
well, we can always say they'll just need to buy copies and buy many copies.
That's true.
Themselves. But one thing I know we have a couple of things that people probably need to check out is Celebrity Attractions has Hadestown, the musical, at the Tulsa PAC. This is a imaginative retelling of the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, which is the story of a guy who goes to hell and to try to fetch back the woman that he loves from the Lord of the underworld.
That was not an after-school special, by the way, but go ahead.
It probably was. And in spite of, Hades and Greek mythology, this is one amazing show. It is really, really good. The cast is extraordinary. The music is very it has a real strong New Orleans vibe, New Orleans jazz vibe to it. It's really something to see. I know almost everybody that I know that has seen it, it instantly becomes their favorite musical of all time. It's that kind of a show. And if you're wanting to really splurge on a meal sometime soon, we have a review of the Hemingway, which is a new steakhouse is maybe a simplified way to describe what they do, but steaks are the stars of the show, as the chef says. It's located on Cherry Street in the basement of the 1515 Lofts building. Really impressive food, an incredible setting. The chandeliers are made out of crystals that predate World War II and are of a type that probably will never be made again. Service is impeccable, and some really intriguing type of food. So that's something to check out.
Well, since you mentioned food, I'll wrap up my part of our podcast with this.
Okay.
It is Tulsa State Fair week.
It is Tulsa State Fair week.
Many people go to the fair to eat food. I found someone who goes to the fair to eat fire. And so to learn more about this mystery, just pick up Sunday's Tulsa World.
Well, some people have to deal with fire after they've eaten, but we won't go there at this particular point in time because this is a family podcast and we must bring it to an end. On behalf of Jimmie Tramel and the absent Grace Wood, we thank you for your time and we will gladly see you later.
Behave.